An entire tribe was gone. No warning, no struggle, no trace. Only quest. They left their homes. They entered the wilderness. And then, they were never seen again. Imagine waking up tomorrow, and everyone around you is gone. That's exactly what this mystery feels like.
Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that an entire tribe has vanished. Not one person, not a few families, an entire community. Gone. No warning, no explanation, no bodies, no clear evidence, only abandoned homes, empty paths, and a mystery that has haunted explorers for generations. But here's the question I want you to answer before we begin. If you arrived at a village and found every single person gone overnight, what would be your first theory? Migration? War? Natural disaster? Or something else? Comment your answer below and stay until the end of this documentary, because I'll reveal the explanation that many historians believe is closest to the truth. But trust me, the answer is not as simple as you think. Now imagine you're walking through the African wilderness. The sun is beginning to set. The air is silent. No voices, no laughter, no movement. Then suddenly, you see a village. At first, it seems normal. Small huts, cooking areas, footpaths. Everything appears exactly as it should. But something feels wrong, terribly wrong, because there are no people, not a single one. Imagine looking inside the huts. Empty. No families, no children, no elders, no sign of life. Only silence. The kind of silence that makes your heart beat faster. The kind of silence that makes you wonder, what happened here? And that's exactly the question that has fascinated historians and explorers for years. Throughout Africa's history, there have been communities that seem to disappear from the historical record. Villages abandoned, settlements left behind, entire groups moving away and leaving only fragments of their story. Sometimes historians can explain why. Sometimes they can't. Now, before we continue, let me ask you another question. What would force you to leave everything behind? Your home, your land, your memories, your ancestors. What could be powerful enough to make an entire community walk away? Keep that question in your mind, because it may hold the key to solving this mystery. Africa has always been a land of movement. For thousands of years, people migrated, kingdoms expanded, trade routes shifted, climate changed. Entire populations moved from one region to another. But some disappearances remain difficult to explain, because in certain cases, the clues simply don't add up. Imagine arriving at a village where cooking tools remain, personal belongings remain, structures remain, yet the people are gone. It's almost like someone pressed pause on history and then walked away, leaving future generations to figure out what happened. As stories spread, legends began to grow. Some people believed tribes had fled into remote forests. Others believed conflict forced them away. Some claimed natural disasters destroyed their way of life. And, as often happens with mysteries, the fewer answers people had, the more theories appeared. But here's the strange part. Many of these vanished communities weren't weak. They weren't isolated. Some were connected to trade routes. Some lived in fertile regions. Some had survived for generations, which makes their disappearance even more puzzling. Imagine being the last person to leave, the final footsteps leaving the village, looking back one last time, knowing you'll never return. What would that feel like? Would you be afraid? Would you be hopeful? Would you believe someone in the future would try to uncover your story? The deeper historians looked, the more they realized something important. The mystery wasn't just about one village. It was about understanding how entire societies can disappear from history. And that brings us to the next chapter. Because hidden deep within Africa's past, researchers discovered clues that may finally explain why some tribes vanished. And the answer begins with something nobody expected: the land itself. Before we continue, if you enjoy mysteries, forgotten civilizations, and incredible true stories from Africa, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because the mystery is only beginning, and the next clue changes everything. Imagine living in a village for generations. Your parents lived there. Your grandparents lived there. Their ancestors lived there. The rivers provided water. The land provided food. The forests provided shelter. Everything seemed stable, permanent, unchanging. Then, the land itself begins to change. At first, nobody notices. A little less rain one year, a slightly smaller harvest the next. The river seems lower than usual. Nothing alarming, nothing dramatic, just small changes. But history has shown us something important. Sometimes the smallest changes create the biggest consequences. Imagine waking up one morning and walking to the river. The water is lower than it was last year. A few years later, it's even lower. Then one day, parts of the river disappear completely. Now imagine hundreds of families depending on that water. What happens next? This wasn't just a problem for one village. Throughout history, entire communities across Africa faced environmental changes. Rainfall patterns shifted. Grasslands dried up. Forests moved. Lakes shrank. And when nature changes, people must adapt or leave. Think about it. If your crops stopped growing, if your animals could no longer find water, if your children were hungry, would you stay? Or would you search for a better place? For many communities, the answer was obvious. They left. But here's where the mystery deepens. Sometimes these migrations happened gradually. Families moved one by one. Villages slowly emptied. Yet, in other cases, the change appears much faster, almost as if entire groups decided to leave within a short period of time. And that's what makes historians so curious. Imagine an explorer arriving years later. He sees abandoned huts, broken tools, empty paths. What conclusion would he reach? Would he think the people disappeared? Or would he realize they simply moved somewhere else? The problem is, history rarely leaves complete answers. And then there was another challenge: competition. As populations moved, different groups entered new territories. Resources became more valuable. Land became more important. Water became more precious. And wherever resources become scarce, conflict often follows. Now imagine two communities relying on the same river. The water level drops. The river shrinks. Suddenly, there's not enough for everyone. Tensions rise. Decisions must be made. And sometimes, entire villages decide relocation is safer than staying. But environmental change wasn't the only clue. Researchers discovered evidence suggesting some communities followed ancient migration routes used for centuries, paths leading toward fertile regions, trade centers, safer environments, places where survival was more likely. And if an entire tribe followed one of those routes, what would remain behind? Very little. Which brings us back to the mystery. Did they vanish, or did they simply move beyond the reach of history? Because those are two very different things. And the answer may be more complicated than either option. Imagine future archaeologists discovering your town thousands of years from now. Buildings remain, roads remain, objects remain, but no written explanation survives. Would they know why people left? Probably not. They would have to guess, just like historians often do today. And that's why this mystery remains so fascinating. The evidence tells part of the story, but never the entire story. Some clues survive, others disappear forever, leaving only questions. But then, researchers found another possibility, a possibility far more dramatic. Because in some regions, entire communities didn't just face drought. They faced something much worse: violence, war, and the collapse of everything they knew. And if that's what happened, the mystery becomes much darker. Let me ask you something. If your village suddenly became impossible to live in, would you stay and fight for it? Or leave everything behind and start a new life somewhere else? Comment your answer below. And if you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to like and subscribe, because the next chapter may reveal the darkest explanation yet. So far, we've explored one possible explanation: climate change, drought, migration. The idea that entire communities may have left in search of survival, and in many cases, that explanation makes sense. But what if that's not the whole story? What if some tribes didn't leave willingly? What if they were forced to leave? Imagine it's the middle of the night. Your village is asleep. The fires are slowly fading. Children are dreaming. The elders are resting. Everything feels peaceful, safe, normal. Then suddenly, a warning cry breaks the silence. People wake up, confused, terrified. Something is wrong, very wrong. Throughout history, many African societies faced threats from rival groups: competition for land, competition for water, competition for trade routes. As populations expanded, conflicts sometimes followed. And when conflict arrives, entire communities can disappear from a region surprisingly quickly. Think about it. If a village knew danger was approaching, would they stay? Or would they gather their families and leave before it arrived? Most would choose survival. Most would leave. And that's exactly what historians believe may have happened in some mysterious cases. Imagine hundreds of people moving through the darkness, carrying only what they can hold, leaving behind homes, belongings, memories, not because they want to, because they have no choice. Now imagine future explorers finding that abandoned village. What would they see? Empty huts, abandoned paths, signs of sudden departure, no obvious explanation. To them, it might look like the people simply vanished, when in reality, they were running for their lives. But here's where things become complicated. History rarely gives us complete records. Many communities left no written documents, no detailed accounts, no clear explanation of what happened. Instead, we find fragments, clues, pieces of evidence, and then we try to rebuild the story. Like detectives solving a mystery thousands of years later, Imagine finding only one page from a 1,000-page book. Could you understand the entire story? Probably not. And that's the challenge historians face every day. Much of the evidence has been lost, destroyed, or simply never recorded. Yet researchers continue finding signs that many communities experienced periods of instability. Trade networks changed, political power shifted, kingdoms rose and fell, entire regions transformed. And when major changes happen, some groups thrive, others disappear from the historical record. But there's another possibility, one that many people never consider. What if the tribe didn't vanish at all? What if they survived, but changed? Think about that for a moment. Imagine your community joins another group. Generations pass, languages evolve, traditions mix, new identities emerge. A few hundred years later, your descendants are still alive, but the original tribe no longer exists under its old name. To history, it looks like a disappearance, but to the people themselves, it's simply a transformation. This idea fascinates many historians because throughout Africa's history, communities constantly interacted, merged, adapted, and evolved. Some groups disappeared as separate identities, while their descendants continued living elsewhere. Suddenly, the mystery becomes much bigger. We're no longer asking, where did they go? We're asking, did they ever truly disappear at all? And that's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because the next clues don't come from villages, they don't come from battlefields, and they don't come from written records. They come from something far older. Stories, legends, oral traditions passed from generation to generation. And some of those stories may contain the final pieces of the puzzle. Quick question. Which theory do you believe so far? Climate change? Conflict? Migration? Or the tribe survived under a different identity? Comment your answer below. And if you're enjoying this mystery, don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next chapter uncovers stories that have survived for centuries. Stories that may reveal what really happened to the tribe that vanished without a trace. Imagine a mystery so old that the people who witnessed it are long gone. No photographs, no newspapers, no official reports. Only stories. Stories told around campfires. Stories passed from grandparents to grandchildren. Stories that survived when everything else disappeared. And sometimes, those stories are the only clues history leaves behind. Throughout Africa, oral tradition has always been powerful. Long before books became common, history was preserved through storytelling. Every generation became responsible for passing knowledge to the next. Kings, wars, migrations, victories, disasters. Everything was remembered through stories. Imagine sitting beside a fire hundreds of years ago. The night is dark. The stars shine overhead. Children gather around the elders, and then someone begins telling a story. A story about a tribe that once lived nearby, a tribe that suddenly disappeared, a tribe nobody ever saw again. Now think carefully. Would every detail remain accurate after hundreds of years? Probably not. Some parts would change. Some details would be forgotten. But the core event, the reason the story survived, often remained. And that's what makes oral traditions so fascinating. Researchers studying mysterious disappearances often compare legends with archaeological evidence. Sometimes they match surprisingly well. A story about a great drought. Then evidence of climate change appears. A story about migration. Then ancient travel routes are discovered. A story about conflict. Then signs of abandoned settlements are found. Suddenly, the legend doesn't seem like a legend anymore. Imagine hearing the same story from different communities, different villages, different regions, different generations. Yet certain details remain the same. That gets historians excited. Because when multiple traditions preserve similar information, there may be a grain of truth hidden inside. But here's where things become truly interesting. Many African legends don't describe tribes simply disappearing. Instead, they describe journeys, long journeys, dangerous journeys, journeys into unknown lands. Think about that. What if the tribe everyone believes vanished actually migrated so far away that future generations lost track of them? What if they settled somewhere else, started new communities, created new identities? To outsiders, it would look like a disappearance. But to them, it would simply be a new beginning. Imagine sitting beside a fire, thousands of stars shining above you. The night is quiet. The flames crackle softly, and an elder begins telling a story. Not a story from a book, not a story written on paper, a story passed from one generation to another, for hundreds of years, maybe even longer. Long before historians arrived, long before archaeologists began searching for clues, Africa's people preserved their history through oral traditions. Stories, songs, legends, memories, passed from parents to children, from elders to future generations. And sometimes, those stories contain truths that written history never recorded. Imagine hearing a legend about a village that once stood nearby, a village that suddenly disappeared, a village whose people left one day and never returned. Would you dismiss it as a myth, or would you wonder if there was a real event hidden inside the story? That is exactly what researchers often ask, because legends sometimes preserve fragments of history, even after centuries. Across Africa, many communities tell stories about migrations, journeys, lost homelands, ancestors forced to leave familiar lands. And while details change over time, the core memory often survives. A memory of movement, a memory of survival, a memory of transformation. Imagine a tribe facing drought, or conflict, or environmental collapse. The people leave. Generations pass. The exact details fade, but the story remains. We came from another land. Our ancestors were forced to move. Our people once lived elsewhere. And suddenly, a legend becomes a clue. Researchers have discovered that many oral histories contain surprising accuracy. Names of places, descriptions of rivers, accounts of migrations, details that later match archaeological evidence. Not perfectly, but often enough to make historians pay attention. Very close attention. Now imagine hearing the same story from different communities, different regions, different generations. Yet certain details remain the same. That consistency suggests something important. It suggests the story may be rooted in a real event, a real migration, a real disappearance, a real chapter of history. And this changes everything. Because maybe the tribe didn't vanish without a trace. Maybe the trace was there all along. Not buried underground, not hidden in ruins, but preserved in memory, preserved in stories, preserved in people. Think about that. History doesn't always survive in stone. Sometimes it survives in voices, in traditions, in families, in stories told around a fire. And those stories can outlive kingdoms, outlive cities, even outlive entire civilizations. But here's the challenge. Stories evolve. Details change. Generations add their own interpretations. And that makes it difficult to separate fact from legend. So historians must compare oral traditions with archaeology, with evidence, with science. Only then can they begin to uncover the truth. And when they did, a fascinating pattern emerged. Many so-called vanished tribes may never have vanished at all. Instead, they adapted, merged with neighboring groups, created new communities, and continued their story under a different name. Suddenly, the mystery looks completely different. Instead of asking, "Where did they disappear?" we begin asking, "How did they survive?" And that question may be far more important. But before we reach our answer, there's one final piece of evidence. One piece that changed how historians think about lost tribes forever. Because the next clues didn't come from stories, they came from modern science. And what scientists discovered was astonishing. Do you think oral traditions can preserve real history for hundreds of years? Comment your answer below. And if you're enjoying this journey into one of Africa's greatest mysteries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon. Because in the next chapter, science enters the investigation, and the mystery takes a surprising turn. For centuries, people relied on stories, legends, oral traditions, fragments of memory passed from one generation to the next. But today, researchers have something previous generations never had: science. And science has a way of uncovering secrets that history tries to hide. Imagine discovering an abandoned village. At first glance, it looks empty, silent, forgotten. But to an archaeologist, it speaks. Every broken tool, every cooking pot, every footprint preserved in the soil, every object tells a story waiting to be decoded. Now imagine scientists carefully excavating a site. They don't just search for treasure, they search for clues. Clues about how people lived, what they ate, where they traveled, and perhaps most importantly, why they left. Sometimes the evidence reveals drought. Researchers examine ancient lake beds, tree rings, sediment layers, and they discover periods when rainfall suddenly declined. Entire regions became drier, water sources disappeared, and communities were forced to move. Other times, the evidence points toward migration. Archaeologists uncover similarities between distant communities, similar tools, similar pottery, similar cultural traditions. It's almost like following footprints across centuries. And those footprints often lead somewhere unexpected. Imagine finding a unique style of pottery in one region, then discovering nearly identical pottery hundreds of kilometers away. What does that suggest? Movement, connection, people carrying their traditions with them, people refusing to abandon their identity, even as they moved into new lands. But perhaps the most fascinating clues come from genetics. Modern DNA research has transformed the way historians understand the past. Because while buildings may crumble and stories may change, genetic connections often remain. Imagine a tribe disappearing from historical records. No one knows where they went. No one knows what happened. Then, centuries later, scientists discovered genetic links between communities living far apart. Suddenly, a lost connection reappears. A hidden chapter of history begins revealing itself. Think about how incredible that is. a mystery lasting hundreds of years, solved through science. Not because someone found a treasure chest, not because someone discovered a secret map, but because traces of the past survived inside people themselves. And that's exactly why many historians are cautious when they hear stories about tribes that vanished completely. Because complete disappearance is actually very rare. Communities often adapt, merge, relocate, transform, but they rarely vanish without leaving anything behind. Which brings us back to our mystery, the tribe that supposedly vanished without a trace. What if the phrase itself is misleading? What if there was always a trace? A trail hidden in migration routes, in cultural traditions, in family histories, in scientific evidence. We simply didn't know where to look. Imagine searching for someone in the wrong place for centuries. Of course you'd never find them. But the moment you start looking in the right place, everything changes. And that's exactly what modern research has done. It has changed the question. Instead of asking, did they disappear? Researchers now ask, where did they go? And that subtle difference changes everything. Because one question assumes loss, the other assumes survival. Yet despite all these discoveries, one mystery remains. Why are stories of vanished tribes so powerful? Why do they capture our imagination? Why do they continue fascinating people across the world? The answer may reveal more about us than about the tribes themselves. And that's where our story goes next. If scientists discovered your ancestors came from a completely different region, would you want to know the truth? Comment below. And if you're enjoying this documentary, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Because the next chapter explores why humanity is so fascinated by lost tribes and forgotten civilizations. Let me ask you something. Why do stories about lost tribes fascinate us so much? Why do millions of people click on documentaries about vanished civilizations, forgotten kingdoms, lost cities, missing people, ancient mysteries? What is it about these stories that captures our imagination? Think about it. Every civilization leaves something behind. A monument, a language, a tradition, a memory. But when a group seems to disappear, something feels unfinished. The story suddenly has no ending, and human beings hate unanswered questions. Imagine reading a book. You become attached to the characters. You follow their journey. Then suddenly, the final chapters are missing. No explanation, no conclusion, no answers. Wouldn't you want to know how the story ends? Of course you would. And that's exactly how historians feel when they encounter mysteries like this. The truth is, we aren't just searching for a vanished tribe. We're searching for an ending. We're trying to complete a story that history left unfinished. And sometimes, the search becomes even more fascinating than the answer itself. Imagine walking through an abandoned village. The wind moves through empty pathways. Grass grows where people once walked. The homes stand silent. And for a moment, you can almost imagine the people who once lived there. Their laughter, their conversations, their dreams, their fears. Everything feels close, yet impossibly distant. That's the strange power of abandoned places. They remind us that every community, no matter how powerful, no matter how successful, can eventually fade from view. And that realization is both fascinating and unsettling. Because deep down, we know history doesn't just happen to other people. One day, Future generations will study us, our cities, our traditions, our way of life. And they will ask questions, the same questions we ask today. Who were these people? How did they live? What happened to them? Imagine 1,000 years from now. A future archaeologist discovers the remains of a modern city. Cars, buildings, technology. But very few records survive. How many wrong conclusions might they reach? How many mysteries would they create? Suddenly, the story of the vanished tribe feels different, because we realize something important. History is incomplete, always incomplete. No matter how much we learn, there are always missing pieces, always unanswered questions, always mysteries waiting to be solved. And perhaps that's why lost tribes continue captivating us. Not because they disappeared, but because they remind us how fragile memory can be, how easily stories can be forgotten, how quickly entire chapters of history can fade away. Yet, despite all this, researchers continue uncovering new evidence, new clues, new discoveries. And with each discovery, the mystery becomes clearer. The picture becomes larger. The story becomes more complete. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. After everything we've learned, did the tribe actually vanish without a trace? Or have we been asking the wrong question from the beginning? The answer may surprise you. And in the next chapter, we'll finally put all the clues together. What fascinates you more? Lost tribes, lost cities, forgotten kingdoms, or ancient mysteries? Comment below. And if you're enjoying this documentary, like the video and subscribe to the channel, because we're about to uncover the truth behind one of Africa's most fascinating mysteries. We've followed the clues, the abandoned villages, the ancient stories, the migrations, the scientific evidence, and now we're finally ready to answer the question that started this entire journey. What happened to the African tribe that vanished without a trace? At first, the mystery seemed impossible. An entire community disappearing from history. No clear records, no obvious explanation. Only silence, only questions, only theories. But as researchers examined the evidence, a different picture began to emerge. A picture far less mysterious, yet far more human. Because the truth is, most tribes didn't simply vanish, they adapted. Imagine facing drought. You move to a new region. A few generations pass. Your children speak slightly differently. Your traditions evolve. Your community changes. A century later, you're still there, but under a different name. To outsiders, it looks like disappearance. To the people themselves, it's survival. Think about how many times this has happened throughout history. Kingdoms rise and fall. Borders change. Languages evolve. Cultures merge. Names disappear. But people continue. Life continues. The story continues. And that's exactly what many historians now believe happened in numerous cases once described as vanished tribes. The communities didn't disappear from existence. They disappeared from the historical record. And those are not the same thing. Imagine losing the title of a book. The title vanishes. The cover disappears. But the pages remain. The story remains. That's what happened to many ancient peoples. The name faded. The people survived. This realization changes everything, because suddenly, the mystery becomes less about disappearance and more about transformation. less about endings, and more about new beginnings. Yet there is another reason these stories remain important. They remind us how easily history can overlook entire communities. How many stories remain untold? How many voices were never recorded? How many lives shape the world without appearing in history books? Imagine living an extraordinary life, helping build a community, raising a family, creating traditions, and then, centuries later, almost nobody remembers your name. That happened to countless people throughout history, and perhaps that's the greatest mystery of all. Not why they disappeared, but why they were forgotten. As researchers continue studying Africa's past, new discoveries are constantly emerging. Ancient settlements, migration routes, artifacts, DNA evidence. Every discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, and every piece brings forgotten stories back to life. So when people ask, did the tribe vanish without a trace? The answer may be, not exactly. Because traces were always there. In stories, in traditions, in descendants, in culture, in memory. We simply needed to learn how to recognize them. And that realization brings us to the final chapter of our journey. A chapter that isn't just about one tribe. It's about history itself, about memory, about survival, and about why forgotten stories still matter today. Do you think a culture can survive even if its original name disappears? Comment your answer below. And if you've enjoyed this documentary so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon, because the final chapter is next, and it may completely change the way you think about history. At the beginning of this documentary, I asked you a question that has followed us through every chapter, every clue, every theory, every mystery. What happened to the African tribe that vanished without a trace? Now, after traveling through history, after examining legends, science, migration routes, and forgotten settlements, we finally have our answer. And surprisingly, the answer isn't about disappearance at all. It's about survival. For most of this journey, we imagined a tribe that simply vanished, gone forever, lost to time, swallowed by history. But the evidence points towards something very different, something far more powerful. The people most likely survived. Their communities changed. Their identities evolved. Their descendants continued living. And their story continued, even when history stopped paying attention. Think about that for a moment. An entire people can seem lost, not because they disappeared, but because the world forgot their name. And that's an important difference. Because names can disappear, maps can change, kingdoms can collapse, but people endure, stories endure, culture endures. Imagine standing in that abandoned village one last time. The huts are empty, the pathways silent, the fires long extinguished. At first glance, it feels like the end of a story. But what if it's actually the beginning of another one? What if the people simply walked beyond the horizon and built a new future elsewhere? Suddenly, the mystery changes. The empty village no longer feels tragic. It feels hopeful. Because somewhere beyond that horizon, life continued. Children were born, families grew, traditions survived, and the spirit of that community lived on. Perhaps that's the biggest lesson hidden inside this mystery. History often focuses on what was lost kingdoms, lost cities, lost tribes. But sometimes, what matters most is what survived. The traditions that survived, the memories that survived, the descendants that survived, the stories that survived. Even after centuries, even after migrations, even after the original names disappeared. And maybe that's why stories like this fascinate us, because deep down, we all want to be remembered. We want our stories to matter. We want future generations to know we existed. The people of these forgotten communities wanted the same thing. And in a way, they succeeded. Because today, we are talking about them, learning about them, remembering them. The mystery of the vanished tribe reminds us that history isn't just about kings and empires. It's about ordinary people, families, communities, dreams, struggles, and the incredible ability of human beings to adapt and survive. So, let's return to the opening question. What happened to the African tribe that vanished without a trace? The answer is, they probably didn't vanish at all. They moved, adapted, merged, changed, survived, and left traces in places we simply weren't looking. Sometimes the greatest mystery isn't where people went. It's why we stopped looking for them. If you had the chance to uncover one historical mystery, what would it be? A lost civilization? A forgotten kingdom? A missing city? Or a vanished tribe? Write your answer in the comments below. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon. Your support helps us uncover more forgotten stories from Africa and around the world. And if you've watched all the way to the end, type "History never disappears" in the comments, so I know you were part of this journey. Villages may become empty, kingdoms may fall, names may be forgotten, but history never truly disappears. It waits, hidden in stories, hidden in memory, hidden in the people who carry it forward, waiting for someone to find it again. The end.